Hello and welcome to another Monday night Q&A. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Duncan McFarlane, one of our technical services team working on the technical helpline and other areas of technical support to the business and our contractors. Good evening, Duncan.
Good evening, Sam.
How are you and how's your day been?
I'm good. My day's been pretty good, yeah. On the phone answering the questions, so like helping our contractors.
Brilliant. And you've got to mention it's a bit of a milestone day for you today, isn't it? Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, it is a very big milestone day for me. I'm actually 50 years in the industry today. I started my apprenticeship in Glasgow on the 5th of August 1974, and it's now the 5th of August. This is
2024.
2024. Time's gone so fast I've even forgotten what year it is.
No.
Yeah, and it's just surprising, Sam, how quickly time passes. And probably some people out there will be thinking, well, why the hell is he working at 66-year-old? You know? But yeah, I enjoy it. I love working with the NIC because great colleagues here, and I like speaking to the contractors and help the contractors out on a daily basis, Monday to Friday.
Yeah, and I think our industry is one of those ones that there's always something new coming. There's always something to learn, a new technology, a new protective device. Something's always new, so it keeps us inquisitive and busy. But yeah, hats off to you for 50 years in the industry. I think that's brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, we'll start off as normal with our question of the week, which we posted out across social media channels earlier today, and I'm glad to say that there were a lot of people getting that answer correct, spot on. So that was really good, but we'll just go through that answer, and then while you're putting your questions in the chat for tonight, we'll go through some of the questions we didn't get round to from previous sessions. So please do post any questions in the chat, remembering there's no such thing as a stupid question, only stupid answers, and please remember to be respectful to each other while you're in the chat. Please do help each other out, but be respectful to each other, because the whole aim of this evening is to try and improve our collective knowledge of and understanding of all things associated with BS 7671 and the world of electrical installations. Just before we start, I just want to highlight we've got a wire webinar this Wednesday on the subject of Amendment 3. There's a lot going on at the moment, as you're probably aware of. Amendment 3 was published last Wednesday, the 31st of July, and also a statement was made that this Wednesday, the 7th of August, they'll be opening the document for public consultation regarding Amendment 4, which is scheduled to be published in 2026. So there's a lot going on. We've put together a webinar predominantly focusing on Amendment 3 and highlighting what Amendment 3 covered and the implications for the industry, but we'll also be looking at Amendment 4 and talking about the DPC process and what we'll do to support that. So if you haven't done already, please go to our website and sign up for that wire webinar special, which is this Wednesday at 8 o'clock on the 7th of August. So without further ado, we'll have a look at the question that we posted out on social media today, and the question was, how quickly will a 6 amp type B BSEN 60898 circuit breaker operate if it experiences a fault current of 6 amps? And the options that we gave you were, would it operate instantaneously, normally recommended as 0.1 of a second? Will it take 0.4 seconds? Will it take 5 seconds? Or will it never operate? And as I said, when I had a look on social media earlier today, the majority of people were getting it right, which was really good to see. So yeah, we'll just confirm the answer. So what did we think our answer was to that one, Duncan? Oh, I think we've lost your. Have we lost your microphone? Yeah, let me see if I can.
Sorry about that.
All right.
Sorry about that.
That's good.
I was just going to say it wouldn't operate at all because if you look in the Appendix 3, Figure 3A4, and you do a vertical line up from 6 amps, it's not going to cross any of those lines. So therefore, it wouldn't be able to trip at all. And if you look across it to the right-hand side of that table, there's a little table within there. And if you look at the 6 amp rating and you go over to the right, the actual current that's needed to operate is a minimum of 30 amps before it'll operate instantaneously. So that's exactly what you have to do. And you can actually work out what your ZS is for the protective device. If you multiply 230 by the C-min factor, which is 0.95, and you divide it by the 6 amps, it will give you the actual ZS figure, which is for a 6 amp B-type device is 7.28 ohms. You can do it the other way around as well. It's just Ohm's law with different letters.
Yeah, no, spot on. But it's as you rightly say, if you draw your line up from the 6 amp mark, you'll see that it doesn't hit the 6 amp circuit breaker curve. And so it would actually never operate, and that was a real I always remember when it was explained to me as an apprentice that they don't operate on their rating, and fuses don't operate instantly on their rating, and that was a real light bulb moment, because I just, up until then, I'd assumed, and I think most non-electrical people, most lay people will assume that it will operate as soon as it experiences its rated current. So
that's right.
So yeah, good learning day.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pick up some of the questions, and while we're doing those questions which have been hanging around, please do take the opportunity to enter your questions in the chat. And we'll do our best to answer those questions that might have been hanging around for yourself for a while. So without any further ado, the first one this evening is an engineer called, during a consumer unit replacement, a borrowed neutral is found between the upstairs and downstairs lighting circuit, which is common in domestic installations. And they recognised that the borrowed neutral was a potential issue and asked which regulation prohibits this. And so nice and straightforward. It's regulation 521.8.2, and that says the line and neutral conductors of each final circuit shall be electrically separate from those of every other final circuit, so as to prevent the indirect energising of a final circuit intended to be isolated. So that's a regulation that it would be non-compliant with, and as it says in the latter part, it's a real issue or potential danger with respect to isolation, because obviously if that neutral was borrowed between two different circuits, if the isolation device for the circuit was single pole, it would only isolate the line conductor, and therefore your borrowed neutral would still be being energized by the other circuit. So that's the risk, the potential shock risk, for example, of a borrowed neutral, which is why they're not permitted under 7671 regulation. Would you add any more to that, Duncan?
Yeah, I would mention regulation 14 of the Electricity at Work Regs 1989, because the neutral is still classed as a line conductor, and for isolation they both need to be isolated and proved dead. And this scenario usually happens. I don't know why they call it a borrowed neutral, because they're never going to give it back. You know, it could be called a shared neutral, and it's usually found in the downstairs hall to the upstairs landing in a domestic property, and sometimes when I was on the tools, we used to fit split load consumer units, and what we found was when we connected them up and put the two lighting circuits, the first floor lighting circuit and the ground floor lighting circuit on, then it would trip both the RCDs. So what we ended up doing was putting the two lighting circuits on the one MCB, the one RCD. And I think another regulation that you could look at is 314.4, and it says there, where an installation comprises more than one final circuit, each final circuit shall be connected to a separate way in the distribution board. The wiring of each final circuit shall be electrically separate from that of every other final circuit, so as to prevent the indirect energising of a final circuit intended to be isolated. And also in the Pocket Guide app, there's some guidance on this as well, and it's actually Q1.35, and it just basically says there, it's a question. After replacing a consumer unit, it's found that there is a shared neutral between the upstairs and downstairs lighting circuit. Would it comply with BS 7671 if I put the lighting onto one circuit to avoid the RCD tripping? And it basically says that you can do that. But I would probably advise people, rather than put the two cables into one breaker, to put a little junction box above the consumer unit. Then you're not contravening any manufacturer specification with putting more than one conductor in the breaker.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to mention was three-phase. It's fine having three-phase with one neutral back if it's one three-phase MCB. Where you could get the problem is if they're three separate single-phase MCBs, then you would have to have three separate neutrals, so that you get proper isolation, because there could be voltage sitting on the neutral.
No, and it's one of the things about combining the circuits that you do need to consider that reg about division of installation, as you say, because you're supposed to minimise the impact of a single fault, and obviously if you're combining two, then you'll lose both circuits with a fault on either one. Yeah.
I suppose you'd need to do some sort of risk assessment, and what sort of people live in the property. Do they need to have the two circuits? Because when we wired houses, we used to do the downstairs hall leading up to the landing, so that if one of the circuits went off, you still had a light downstairs in the hall.
Yeah, that seems it was a style at one point to do sort of the front of the house and the back of the house rather than upstairs and downstairs, but it seemed that seems to have been lost in that it's generally now upstairs and downstairs. But people will say that if for lighting, if you lose lighting, then you will normally have another option. So table lamps, that are plugged into socket outlets. So yeah, it's perhaps not. It's mitigated a little by that.
Yes.
Okay. Let's have a look at another one that was hanging around. So question 2. We have a medical emergency shower in the workplace due to some of the chemical processes involved with production. Does the 3 metre socket rule still apply to a workplace shower? So by that 3 metre socket rule, they're talking about rooms containing a bath or a shower and not being allowed to have socket outlets. It's now actually within 2.5 metres, not 3. So that changed in, was it the Brown Book or the Blue Book? I can't remember, but it changed fairly recently.
I think it was been Amendment 2.
Yeah, Brown Book Amendment 2. Yeah. So what's our thoughts on that one, Duncan? Is it a problem having an emergency shower?
No, I don't think it's a problem with an emergency shower, because if it's an emergency, people are going to go in there fully clothed. you know, to get, it might be something that they've got in their eye or something, they need to get something out their eye or something.
Yeah.
And the section doesn't apply to emergency facilities such as emergency showers used in industrial areas or laboratories. Obviously, you would still need to take into account the general requirements of BS 7671, like regulation 512.2.1. Equipment shall be of a design appropriate to the situation in which it's to be used, or its mode of installation shall take account of the condition likely to be encountered. And there's also a RAG. There's also RAG information on that, and that's 1.22. If anybody would like a copy of that, we can put that out in by email for you, so that you've got a copy of that.
Yeah, so RAG that you're referring to, Duncan, just remind people where they can go to get those RAG questions and answers.
Yeah, you can go to the NIC Pocket Guide. If you download the NIC Pocket Guide app, it's got all this information. It's got calculators on it, it's got RAG on it, it's got all the best practice guides on it, so it's a very useful source of information.
Yeah. And the RAG that Duncan's referring to is Wiring Regulations Advisory Group, and that's hosted by the organisation Electrical Safety First, who publish professional resources, and they've got two sets of frequently asked questions, one associated with new installations and one associated with test and inspection of new and existing installations. So yeah, a really good database of questions and answers, and they're all agreed by an industry group, so a wide-ranging industry group, including ourselves, including other certification bodies such as NAPIT, including the IET, BEMA, and lots of representatives from across the industry. So they really can be considered as industry agreed answers, so a really good source of information. Okay, another one while we're waiting for some questions to come into the chat. So question 3 that was kicking around: when fitting a double stack consumer unit, how do I comply with the requirements for all the RCBOs to be within 1350 and 1450 millimeters above the finished floor? What's our thoughts on that one, Duncan?
I would say that the 1350 to 1450, in order to keep them out the reach of young children, should be to the bottom bank of protective devices. And it also should be noted that the value of 1350 to 1450 is applicable in England under approved documents P and document M, and there's one M1 I believe is for domestic, and M2 is for like commercial premises. In Wales it's between 1200 and 1400 millimetres in accordance with Welsh approved documents Part P and M. In Scotland it is no more than 1200 millimetres in accordance with Scottish Technical Handbook D10, and in Northern Ireland it's between 1200 and 1400 in accordance with their technical booklet R. And you know what I advise people on the technical services line is, if they've got any issues with it, is to contact a local building control and they'll give you information on that, because BS 7671 just says that any electrical equipment should be accessible for inspection, testing, use and maintenance. So if you wanted to deviate from the building reg standard, you would have to contact building control. It's not a 7671 issue.
Yeah.
More building control.
But it's worth saying there is a BEMA document, isn't it? So we mentioned BEMA because they're one of the organisations that contribute to the Wiring Regulations Advisory Group. So BEMA are the British Electromechanical and Allied Manufacturers Association. So product manufacturers, consumer units, protective devices, conduit, trunking, you name it. And those that organisation publishes technical material, and they did actually publish a technical bulletin on this, which specifically gave us the answer on the basis that it was something that some guidance that they'd developed in conjunction with the government department, DCLG. And yeah, it's common now in properties, in particular in large properties, that we will have a double stacked consumer unit, so 2 rows of protective devices, and then of course it was the issue of well, which row do we have to make sure that fits in with those constraints. So yeah, it was the bottom row, and then as Duncan says, just be mindful that it's slightly different in the devolved nations. So we think of part P and part M of approved documents, P and M in Britain, also similar in Wales, but very different in Scotland and Northern Ireland, where they've got their own building regulations.
That's right. Another thing to think about, I don't know whether they still do the dual tariff boards, but they used to be a double-decker board, the top and bottom. Yeah. But as long as you keep that 1350 to 1450 to the bottom bank, then that puts the consumer unit up a little bit higher.
Yeah. Okay. Another one that we get asked from time to time, do single insulated conductors need to be installed in trunking or conduit? So people are obviously aware there's a requirement for single insulated conductors to be installed or conduit in conduit or trunking, and the question was, do single insulated protective conductors need to be installed in trunking or conduit? So again, what's our thoughts there, Duncan?
No, I don't believe they do. Right, not Regulation 521.10.1 states that non-sheath cables for fixed wiring shall be enclosed in conduit, ducting or trunking. This requirement does not apply to a protective conductor complying with Section 543. Section 543 covers protective conductors, including their requirement cross-sectional area, the acceptable types of protective conductor, and the requirements for the preservation of electrical continuity of protective conductors. 543.3.1 states, a protective conductor shall be suitably protected against mechanical and chemical deterioration and electrodynamic effects, and general regulations such as 522 regarding protection against expected external influences. So I see sometimes that people run like main protective bonding conductors outside, right? So that cable, I wouldn't have just put a single core 10mm or 16mm outside without any protection. I would give it some additional mechanical protection, because it could be subject to vandalism, and it can also be subject to hot and cold temperatures, very cold temperatures in the winter, and pretty high temperatures in the 2-day summer that we get in this country.
Yeah.
And so there's 522.3.1 to consider, and 522.1.1 where it's extreme temperatures, hot and cold. But in general, they don't require any additional protection by putting in an enclosure.
Yeah. So that's it. That reg tells us that circuit protective conductors are exempt from requiring protection, but as you said, there may be other reasons, and we're back to our fundamental principles about everything we install either has to be suitable for the environment in which we're installing it, or the way that we install it makes it suitable. So yeah, really good Okay, let's take a look at some of the questions that are in the chat. And the first one I can see from one of the engineers this evening. If I'm going to alter an old ring main, which would mean adding more sockets, but as I can't add an RCD or RCBO at the board due to the board type, so can I put an RCD on the ring, mid-ring, onto additional radial or ring to add more sockets? Yeah, I think from your question, what I'm understanding is that it's a socket outlet circuit, and it is a ring, and you want to add more sockets, but you can't, due to the board type, put an RCD or RCBO at the board. So a couple of things that spring to mind for me is that there may be two reasons why you need RCD protection. The first one's going to be the socket outlets, and so that's generally a requirement unless you're in one of those specific installations where you can exempt it through risk assessment, which is quite specific. So if we're talking about a general installation, you would normally need RCD protection for the socket outlets. Now you could provide that two ways. You could put an RCD protecting the whole circuit, or you could use RCD socket outlets, and then that would prevent you having to put an RCD in the board, because you just have to make sure that your additions and alterations meet current regs. You don't necessarily have to bring up the whole circuit. The issue there would be the cabling between the existing installation and your new sockets. If that cabling requires RCD protection, because for example you're burying it in the wall, then you're going to have to put an RCD on that cabling as well. So one option might be to actually spur. You don't say whether your additional sockets need to be part of the ring. If you could spur your additional sockets, so if there's multiple ones, the first one would need to be a fused spur, or some have a form of overcurrent protection for the cable of the spur, but you could do it that way then, and make that point your RCD, and then you're protecting both the circuits, both the sockets and the circuit on the supply side of your spur. But yeah, that's my two thoughts. One is, if your cable is surface mount, you could go the route of an RCD socket outlet, but if your cable needs RCD protection, either because the type of cable or the cable route, then you're going to have to consider another method, and it might be that you can come out onto a spur and then RCD protect the cable from that spur, but you'd be limited with current. Would you add anything to that, Duncan?
Yeah, I was thinking that you could possibly use a separate little one-way consumer unit, put it on Henley blocks, and take the ring circuit to that, and put an RCBO in the extra box. And you could supply it from the main consumer unit to the new consumer unit, and then put your sockets on one RCD or one RCBO.
Yeah, so effectively transfer the circuit from the existing board to the new small two-way board, and then use that board, and then just running the cable from the breaker in the existing board. Make sure again that cable to the new board doesn't need RCD protection. Again, it'd be down to space, wouldn't it? Have you got space in the location of the main consumer unit or distribution board? But yeah, some options there certainly.
If we look in Appendix 15, there's some options there, and like Sam said, if you're going to be spurring off the ring for more than one socket, you would have to have a fused connection unit on the ring. And it really does boil down to that, doesn't it? That you've got to make sure that your additions and alterations meet current regs, but you don't need to bring the whole circuit up to current regs. So long as your socket outlets and your cables, your new cables, have got the protection they require,
whether
Yes.
that's RCD or not for the cables, then that would be acceptable. You don't need to bring the whole circuit up, and that's where the box on your installation certificate or your minor work certificate, which talks about the existing comments on existing installation, that's where you're going to have to make it very clear the condition of the installation and that circuit in particular, what it was like before you started your work, to make it clear that didn't have RCD protection.
Yeah.
Okay. Another one that's come in to the chat it is in a TT system. If the earth fault loop impedance is low enough, can I rely on overcurrent protective devices for protection, or do I have to use an RCD? Again, a common question we get asked, and normally RCDs are required because the TT earthing arrangement is of a high resistance, too high to operate a normal overcurrent protective device in the time required. But if you've got a very low earth fault loop, perhaps due to structural steel for the building being used as your earth electrode, then yes, you can. It's perfectly acceptable too, and the regulation does say something along the lines of one or more of the following types of protective devices shall be used, the former being preferred, but the second one is an overcurrent protective device. So yes, it's acceptable. Would you agree with that, Duncan?
Yeah, I would. The regulation that you were quoting there very eloquently was 411.5.2, and providing that you've got, like you say, a low enough resistance on the earth electrode, like you said, structural steel, big steel beams all in parallel together could possibly give you lower readings than the TN system, depending on what size of steel is. So yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, very much so. It does happen. In particular, in those instances where we've got structural steel providing us our earth electrode. So it's a good use of that. Okay, let's have a look.
Just to add on to that, Sam, there's another RAG, our friend RAG again, 1.128, Q1.128. Give you some further information on that. I'm just having a look in here. No, it's okay. It's not that.
Yeah,
it's fine. It does quote 411.5.2 there as well. Yeah. Q1.128.
Yeah. Another common one that we get, what should I do when I find a TNCS system with a ZE that's much greater than the maximum of 0.35 ohms? So yes, this is a common question that we get on the helpline. The first thing to say is the 0.35s aren't maximums. They're given as typical values. And so, strictly speaking, the DNO doesn't have to achieve that 0.3 value for a TNCS system. So, for example, it might be 0.36 or 0.4, and so long as it's stable, then the DNO won't do anything to lower it to 0.35. The 0.35 figure is given as a typical value. So that you can do calculations and do your design before the earthing arrangement's actually installed. So that's what that value's for. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not a maximum that the DNO has to achieve. If you are getting more than 0.35, we always recommend informing the DNO. So inform the DNO for the area of the country that you're in, and request that they visit site to investigate the issue. It's always worth checking to see if you've got any previous evidence of values. So if there are any previous installation certificates or condition reports that you've got that value recorded on, and then you can inform the DNO if it's increasing or staying the same. But yeah, if it's increasing and getting worse, then that could be an indication of a cable fault in the transmission or distribution network. But yeah, it's not a maximum, unfortunately. If it's not affecting your ZS readings, so it's low enough to make sure that your protective devices do still work, then it's the installation can still be completed and certificated as being compliant with 7671. But we'd also recommend informing the customer, because you might want to go back. For example, if it was a job installed in the winter, you might want to go back in the summer when the ground is drier and you've not got such good readings. So yeah, it's worth having a look at in different situations and just to see really over a period of time, is that value increasing or if it's staying stable. If it's staying stable, then that's a good sign. If it's slowly increasing, then again contact the DNO and make them aware that you believe you've got a potential issue.
Yeah, I believe that comes under regulation 28, is it, in the ESQCR regs, to inform the DNO that the reading's higher than what the 0.35. And I don't think it's so much a problem today because most circuits are protected by RCDs. But the only thing that you need to check is that you're getting your overload and short circuit protection as well. So it used to be much more an issue a few years ago before the RCDs came in. But like they say, if they're being protected by RCDs and the RCDs operating times, I don't think it's so much a problem today.
Yeah, and like you say, it's worth recording. It's worth informing the DNO. But if it's low enough so that it doesn't affect the ZS readings for your protective devices, then it's perfectly acceptable to carry on and complete the installation and certificate it for compliance with 7671.
Yes.
Okay. Another question that again comes in quite often is what's the recommendation for interval between periodic verifications for circuits supplying EV charging points? Now, in our inspection and test book and in lots of other industry guidance, there's recommended periods for the first periodic inspection of new installations, but EV is one type of installation that's missing from that list. So a couple of things. First off, we'd suggest seeing if the EV charging equipment manufacturer has got any recommended guidance based on the type of equipment that you're installing and its location, so how exposed to the elements, for example, it is. If not, then we would recommend inspecting and testing the electric vehicle charging circuit at the same interval as the installation from which it's being supplied. So if that's a domestic with 5 years recommended inspection for the installation, then inspect the vehicle charging equipment at the same time. But again, it's a judgment call based on the environment. So for example, if it was outside and a harsh environment, then you might consider reducing the period to the next inspection for the vehicle charging equipment. Would you add any more to that, Duncan?
I don't think I would, Sam. I think you've covered that. If it's I would follow the guidance note number 3, right? And depending on what type of installation, like if it's maybe a 3-phase in a factory, maybe in an industrial situation, then it would be maybe 3 years. But at the end of the day, it's down to the installer to make that decision, how long he thinks that it should be inspected and tested for.
Yeah, so that's a good point, because the installer will know, so if it is a commercial installation, like you said, they might have a maintenance regime, in which case the period to the next inspection could be increased. if you knew that it was undergoing regular maintenance. So so yeah, very much down to the inspector based on his knowledge of the installation, including how it's maintained. Okay, we're going to look at one more. So before undertaking an electrical installation condition report, would you recommend a site survey of a site if you've not worked at that site before? And I think that the answer to that is yes, a real resounding yes. And it's we try and make people aware of something that not everybody's aware of, and that's there's a regulation 651.1 and it states that when no previous documentation is available, investigation of the electrical installation shall be undertaken prior to carrying out the periodic inspection and testing. So that's a shall, which says you should do it. So if you go to a situation where there's no previous condition report or there's no previous installation certificates, which is fairly common, we all know that that we go to those installations where there's nothing documented about the past because it's old and perhaps been lost. So 7671 says in those instances you should do an investigation of the installation first before you dive straight in and do a periodic inspection. And that site survey will help you greatly because it will give you an awful lot of information. You'll be able to look at the overall condition of the installation. So if it is large and sampling's relevant, you'll be able to pick the areas where you think that there's most potential issues. You'll be able to look to see was some installed later than others, you know, and judging by that survey, you'll then have a much better understanding of the installation before you dive in. You know, another great one is, are you going to have all the access that you need? Do you need any specialist equipment? You know, have they got high bay low lighting that you're going to have to get access equipment to be able to get to? So all those things need to be considered before you start. Otherwise you're possibly going to end up with so many limitations that you're not going to get a true reflection of the condition of the installation. Good idea to have a survey first, Duncan?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, looking at the overall condition of the installation, we usually recommend having a walk round with the client, you know, and explain what would be involved and confirming any maintenance regimes which are in place. You know, is the installation well maintained? Is it not maintained? You know, so that would probably increase your sample and the amount of inspection and testing that you would need to do when you eventually get round to do it. Age and condition, like you mentioned, Sam, obviously the older it is, not saying that the installation's any less safe, but the older it is, probably the bigger risk of it being unsafe. Confirmation of access to equipment to being inspected and tested, like you mentioned about the high bay lighting, low bay lighting, etc. And like you say, you know, you'll only get an accurate picture if you do less limitations. And if you're doing samples and it's a big installation, big industrial or commercial installation, sample each section of the installation, not just do one sample in one board, so that you get an overall view of the entire installation. Investigation of why the installation is being inspected and tested. Why is it being inspected and tested? Is it going to be change of use? Is it going to be change of owner? Things like that. Is it periodic? Is it overdue? Has there been any equipment failures? This is all information that you can get from the client when you're doing a walk round. And regulation 651 also states, wherever possible, the documentation arriving from the initial certification and any previous periodic inspection and testing shall be taken into account. So, if possible, ask for this documentation so that it can be reviewed, and very importantly, so that you can see how things have deteriorated over time But you know, in my experience and out in the field, it's pretty unusual. With a lot of contractors, with a lot of clients that they don't have this paperwork. So a lot of times you're basically just starting from scratch, and I think that's why Regulation 651 states that you should do an inspection before doing your inspection.
Yeah. You don't want to find out things on the day that are going to have a massive impact. Okay. Once again, we've rattled through our time. So before we go, just want to make you aware of Wire webinars. There's a lot of Wire webinars that you can access through the website and watch on demand. One of them being we did one on electrical installation condition reporting, so that would be well worth a watch with regard to that last question. Just a second reminder of Wednesday night's webinar, a special edition covering Amendment 3 and an introduction to the document for public consultation for Amendment 4. Please do stay in touch with us on all the various social media platforms. So if you've got questions, post them to us. If you've got subjects or topics that you'd like us to cover in future webinars, then please let us know about those. And lastly, thank you very much for participating tonight. I know it's holiday period and it's nice and warm and there's Olympics on the telly, so thank you very much for those that contributed tonight and put in their questions. Hopefully we answered them for you, and if we didn't get around to answering yours tonight, then we'll use those as our starting point next time. Next time will be Monday the 2nd of September, again at 8 o'clock, first Monday of the month. So we'll have another live Q&A event on Monday the 2nd of September. So until then, thanks for taking part. Hopefully we'll see you again. Any final comments from yourself, Duncan?
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming in and listening, and I hope they've learnt something. I certainly have, because this is the first live online session I've done, and I've really enjoyed it. I was panicking a bit today, but I've enjoyed it. So thanks everybody for listening, and thanks for your support, Sam, as well. Thank you.
No, it's good. Okay, thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon.